This video is going to be on using CakePHP socket and HTTP client methods to send information to Nicelabel Automation Manager and print a palette label. The different levels of licensing for Nicelabel Automation Manager mean that at an enterprise level you can send jobs to an inbuilt HTTP server, but at the easy or express level you can only send information via raw TCP ports. So this is going to give an option to do both depending on what license you want to pay for. So to get started, we have just a default install of CakePHP, and we're running it in Docker, but we need firstly somewhere to be able to trigger a HTTP send or a socket send. So we're going to create a new controller, and because we're not using any database backend, we're just going to create it with no actions, and then we're going to specify a number of functions. So this one will be a print function where we'll trigger the print. Then we will have one function for triggering the HTTP print, and then we'll have one for doing a socket print to the third-party system. Now, to give ourselves a page for this print function, we'll create a directory the same name as the labels controller and create a file named print.php. With our roots file, we can make it a bit easier for ourselves and specify that our default root, our home root if you like, is just going to be that root there. So when we connect to the browser, it will just be a blank page at the root. Now we want to give ourselves a couple of links on that page, so I'm going to set some information to the view, and we're going to call it links, and it's going to be a socket and a HTTP link. And on the page itself, we want to just create something so that our autocomplete works here, and we want to create an unordered list with our links being created here with, we want a post link or a post button. So we go form and then post button. We want the title to be the same as our link. The URL that we're going to connect to will just be those individual actions in our controller, our HTTP and socket actions. And finally, let's define a confirm prompt at do you want to submit via, and then we can use and finally there. and we need to close our loop as well. So having a look there, and it doesn't look like, so we might need to is it that? I don't know. Probably it's not the right thing. So CSS, there we go, and list style type none. So I got that one wrong, but you'll hopefully forgive me for not being a full-on memory capable person. So here we have now our socket method and our HTTP method, and what we want them to do once we've completed them is we want them to return to our print view. So I'll just create a return statement and a redirect. So it's going to be action will be going back to the print method, and both of our methods after that will be going back there. That's good. So we've got our layout here working. So now let's go and start to think about submitting data via these two different methods. This HTTP method is obviously going to be submitting to a URL. Now the URL will be the IP address of this computer that we're on, plus this port, plus this path. So I'll just construct that. And it's HTTP request. Now the IP address of this computer that we're on is that .140. Now I've forgotten 56425. 56425 is the port number, and the name URL is that. So that's what we're going to be submitting to. Now we need to get a reference to our HTTP client, and it's just that. So it's the Cake HTTP client class there, like that. Then we need to say to ourselves, well, if it's going to error out, I don't want it to be the default, so I'm going to set a config to make sure the timeout isn't going to wait for 30 seconds. So if we're on a corporate network on a single site, we don't want to wait for 30 seconds. We want to error quickly. So that enables that config option there. And then when we want to submit, we're going to use post, and so we can call the post method, pass it the URL, and then we need to set it up to handle some data. And when we look at our automation manager here, we can look into the configuration of this particular configuration and notice that it's triggered by a submission to this port and this path, but its data filter is expecting to receive XML in this format. So we now need to generate some palette data that will pass data into this palette label with all these variable field names. So let's start doing that. So we know that we want to submit XML to this endpoint, so we're just going to define XML there, and then we have to define XML that we're going to pull in. So firstly, to get to XML, well, it'd be nice to start with an array of data for a label. So I'm not going to type that out laboriously. I'm just going to create a utility directory, and then we can call it label factory.php, and then I'm going to paste in some code that will just generate those labels for us. So here we have it's returning just all the expected field names with data, and we're using Faker with fake barcode provider I made up so that I could get hold of SSC and GTIN14 barcodes. We don't need that. We're also using Chronos, which is CakePHP's date time class, to add minutes to a random number of so that we've got X number of minutes, so it's in the future the best before will be. And that also is receiving, if we're creating multiples, I want a serial number passed in so that the file name won't just have the timestamp with the same seconds. It will also have a serial number, and it's also passing in the type of request we're making, so we'll just tell it it's HTTP or socket depending on what we pass in. So the class will be called by this make method, and it will just loop through and make as many labels as we want it to. So having a look at that, we might just create a data variable here, instantiate our label factory, and we can tell it what action we've got. So we want to know what type it is, so we go request, and then we say get parem, and say that's the type of label we're generating, and then we want to make, and if we say 2, we leave it something it's not the default, but that's, let's see what we get when we send to that endpoint. So there we've asked for 2, and we get just some label data plus a file name with the type of requests we're making there. So we'll default that to be just one label. We only want to create one label at a time. And now we see that this post still needs to have this data in XML data. So how can we go from having an array of data, as we can see here, to XML? Well, that's where we can use we're not going to use this one, but we're going to use an XML view class. So to do that, let's create another file in our utility classes called call it view creator, and this one will have it's got the same namespace, it's app utility, and the class name is obviously view creator, the same name as the file name. And we're going to create 2 different methods. One is going to take the data and produce XML, and the other one will take the same data and produce comma separated value file. The XML one, all we need to do is to get that one, because it's a Cake native view method, is we need to get a reference to our view builder, say new view builder, and then we want to set the view builder up. So we want to set a class name. So the class name for the view builder is going to be XML, and the option that we're going to set for this one, we're just going to set a single option, and it's serialize, and the data we want to serialize is going to be the data variable. Then from there we want to create our view. So that's configured our view builder. Now we want to create our view, and once we've created our view, we want to set the data to it and then return that view once we've rendered it. So now look, let's have a look at what this particular, so we get a reference to our view creator, and then we say, okay, this one, it's XML, and we pass the data in, and let's have a look at what XML gets dumped to the. So notice there that when we press enter, we're doing a get request to this endpoint, and it's allowing it all to run. So it's coming back to us with XML. As a security feature, you might want to do this. You can specify in your view, in your controller method, you can specify that it will only accept certain methods. So in that case, we'd have to go back to our print page and click this to get the post working. Now that's one way of making sure that the wrong method doesn't get hit, but you can also guard it if you like by doing something in a pre-filter or a before filter. So if we go into our class here and go public function, and then it's before filter, and then make sure that we call that on the parent as well, we can, in here we can say, okay, if this request that's being sent to this controller is a GET request, or maybe we would say if it's not a POST request, and it's either one of these two actions. So we're going to look for this needle, so we're going to request get param action, and it's neither one of these, sorry about that, socket and HTTP, it's neither one of those, then we're going to return a redirect, and we're going to send everything back to the print action. So from now on, if we attempt to do this, it will just send us back to where we go, but if we specify, alright, so that's now doing what we want. It's guarding against it being called with the wrong method, and there's two methods for that. You can just deny it like this, or you can do something like this to test it and see if you want to allow it. Now we've got to the point where we're posting our data to the endpoint here. Let's see if that's worked. Oh, it has. So it's working, but we're getting no feedback to say that it was successful. So that might be something that we can do here. But one thing, what's going to happen if we, let's say we change that from 5 to 4 and then attempt it again, and it should time out in 2 seconds and then give us this nice ugly development error page. But we might want to handle that, so copy the exception that it creates and then go here and go put a try catch in, and then replace the throwable with our cake exception and copy the line of code that's throwing the exception there, and then we can do something like this flash and then we say error, and just take the exception and get the message. And now trying again, so it'll go back to HTTP and we can just trigger it, and then we can see we've got our error message. Now that's good. Now let's go back to the working case, and we want to specify, well, if it doesn't error out here, well, let's create a success message also to give some feedback, and we can say successfully submitted to, and we'll just pass in the URL. And now let's have a look when we send it to the job, and we can see that we're creating our file there. Now I'm just going to try that one more time, because do we have an error message that I'm missing? Try again, HTTP, and does it create a file? Yes, it does, so we're all good. And there we have our label generated by Nicelabels. So now we have a working implementation of the HTTP client with a few things that we can do to catch errors and respond to application exceptions and those sorts of things. Now let's move across to our socket implementation. So I'm going to just copy this entire block of code and paste it into my socket action, and this time we're just going to go through and modify it to work with the socket class. Now in our automation manager, firstly we'll just have a look that all it's asking for us is to connect to port 11973 and write some data to that socket. That's what it's expecting. Now if we have a look at the configuration of this particular trigger, once it receives the data, it's going to apply a filter on it here, the structured text filter. And if we have a look at that filter and look at the structure, we can see that it's expecting a CSV format to be pumped into it. So we go to our controller here and we say, okay, we know that we're not going to be doing HTTP, we're going to be connecting to TCP. We don't have a URL or a path to that one, so let's have a look and see. It's 11973, so we want 11973. And we're not connecting to the HTTP client, but we're going to pull in our socket client from CakePHP. Now this socket client also has a set timeout configuration option, so we're going to leave the timeout at 2 seconds. And now we're going to go through and just make the changes we need to get the correct data. So we know we need CSV, so I'm going to change this to CSV, and we'll have a look at that once we grab it. So I'll just give ourselves a dump and die statement. Let's now go over to our View Creator class and modify our XML code to create CSV code. Now in our Composer JSON file, we need to have pull in a plugin called the CSV View plugin. So to do that, we go to Friends of Cake, pull this in, and just do the install. And the Friends of Cake plugin, if we have a look at here, when we look in plugin PHP, we can see the name of the plugin is this, CSV View, and inside the plugin we're going to pull in a view class called the CSV View class. So how does that go together? Well, the way it works is we use plugin notation, and it's CSV view with a dot, so the name of the plugin, and then the difference is we don't go CSV view. No, we just specify CSV because it automatically knows it's a view file. So that's enough for us to specify the correct view class, so it will convert the data object into CSV. Now we need to set a number of options, so I'm going to change this slightly. Yes, we still want to serialize the data view variable, but we also want to specify our headers for the CSV file. So we can do that simply by saying, okay, the headers are going to be the array keys of the first object that's passed in. So that'll just be the headings for the CSV file. So now that has given us what we need. We've got a dump and die statement here. Let's see if it's working correctly. So this time it's the socket dump and die, and we can see that we're now getting our CSV file with the heading names and all the data as each line. So we know that we're not using HTTP, so for the socket client we're using connect, and once we've got a connection we want to write to the socket, and it's just that CSV data that we're writing. Now this is going to fail miserably for us, and let's just do that now. So we'll go click and go OK, and it's saying unable to connect to localhost 80, and that's the default it's connecting to. So we need to specify a configuration for our socket class so that it pulls it in correctly. Now to do that, we convert a URL into an array. So this pass URL function will do that for us and pass it into our socket configuration to our constructor. Now just to show you what that looks like is go back and just that's what it's converting it to. So scheme, host, port, and it just does that nicely there. So now we have our connection being configured properly. We do the connect statement here in our try catch block. If it is successful, it will, and we can do this, we can go, it will write submitted, and we can do this. And we can set that up, and it should, when we have a look, it should say successfully submitted, and we've clearly made a mistake there, so that's good. So to there, let's now make a change so that it's going to fail. And what do we need to do now? Well, it's now causing a different exception to occur, and we could make a change to this so that if it causes that exception, it will give us a nice error message as well. So let's try that again, and it times out after 2 seconds and tells us what was wrong. So now we'll just get it working properly, and oops, hit socket, and we can see if we look at our directory that we've got a number of files created through Nicelabels from CakePHP. Now there is a problem here that is quite common to occur that sometimes you can do this and you've mixed your configuration data in with your logic, and you really need to separate that out. So what we're going to do is just have a look at doing that. Now in your Bootstrap file, there's something called the PHP config, which loads your app file and also then looks for app_local, and if that exists, the _local stuff will override the settings in app. So you can do something similar here and say, okay, I want my own configuration file, and so you can create your own configuration file to keep things separate, or one of them you might commit to source control, the other you don't want to because it's got secrets in it, but you can create your own configuration file, and then all you need to do for the PHP config is just return an array. So that array can be keyed and formatted as you like, but it's nice to sort of group things under a common top level property, and then just we can do socket URL, and then we can do the HTTP URL, and then go and grab. So that's the socket URL, so we can say, okay, I want to pull in from our configuration, so it's Nicelabel dot socket URL, and we want to bring that one in as well, and paste that socket URL in, and then we do the same with our and pull in configure, and again Nicelabel dot, what was that, HTTP URL there, and right, so now we've specified our own custom configuration file, and that can be useful when you just want to keep things separate or have a special file for it. So that is using the HTTP and socket classes, client and socket classes, to talk to a third-party system. I hope that's of use to someone.